G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with a bit of a news item. I'm going to read to you from the local Glen Examiner, but to set the scene, Glen is a town with about 7,000 people living in the town, another 3,000 people living in the surrounding agricultural area. It used to be a municipal council and a local shire, like a hole in a donut arrangement, but the two have been amalgamated for a few years. So 10,000 people. And if you go 50 kilometres to the east of town, there's a block of land, 3,500 acres. It's an alternative lifestyle community set up during the 70s. And there are third generation descendants of the original settlers living there. And they're people who've basically decided not to live in towns and cities and to explore their own little form of society. And it's kind of like a village, but everybody lives just out of sight of each other. And they are particularly good, in my experience, at dealing with death in their community. There have been a few deaths there over the years. They have their little cemetery, and they don't tend to overstep society's boundaries. They don't get into a lot of trouble. If we look to the west of town, 50 kilometres west, there's a couple of farms over there that have been purchased by an American religious community called the Bruderhofen. And they're kind of a little bit Amish-ish, in that the women get to wear headscarves and no makeup and fairly plain looking clothes, and the blokes tend to dress indistinguishably from anybody else with baseball caps and checkered shirts. And there's a lot of money attached to the American headquarters, so they could afford to buy the land, fix the fences, throw up some buildings, and they run a factory manufacturing signs. The signs are computer carved foam styrene, specially painted, and one of their particular party tricks is to use gold leaf on these 3D signs, which have sprouted all over the district and for hundreds of kilometres in all directions. And for a long time they had generated only good publicity, and then they got themselves in a bit of hot water and a few court cases regarding passports and visas and overstaying their allotted term living in Australia. And since then they've managed to get themselves in a fair degree of hot water with an unreported death. And it's been on the radio recently, and day before yesterday I bought the newspaper, and behold, Tuesday 5th of March 2013, the Glen Examiner, didn't make the front page, but got a fair slab over here on page 2. Considering the recent developments in the United Kingdom, where they're slowly but surely shifting the law in favour of allowing death with dignity, I thought a few people on YouTube might be interested in how such things are handled in Australia on what is admittedly kind of the hairy edge of what goes on. Unreported Danthonia death investigated by Eamon Duff of the Sun-Herald. Health authorities have widened the inquiry into the unreported death of a US holidaymaker on farmland belonging to a religious cult, launching an investigation into two nurses who were allegedly present. Irene Maindell collapsed of a suspected stroke in March 2010 while visiting her son, Chris Maindell, who is a senior figure and resident doctor with the Bruderhof, a strict Christian movement whose members live on a property named Danthonia west of Glen. To the disbelief of some of Ms Mandell's friends and relatives, Dr Maindell and his father Jake decided not to send her to a nearby hospital for specialist care. She was instead kept at Danthonia and given repeated doses of morphine while the 170-strong flock took turns to pray at her bedside. She died 6 days later and was buried on the property without the police or coroner being informed. A Fairfax investigation last week revealed that Dr Maindell's involvement is to be examined by the Healthcare Complaints Commission Disciplinary Tribunal, which starts in Sydney's District Court on Monday. It can also be confirmed that 2 registered nurses and Bruderhof members, Andrew Bluff and Anthony Fishley, will appear before a separate Nursing and Midwifery Professional Standards Committee hearing in May. The news comes as the Dutch-based granddaughter of the Bruderhof founder, Dr Eberhard Arnold, lashed out at the movement, labelling it a cult. Dr Arnold founded the Bruderhof in Germany in 1920, aiming to build a community in which love and justice overcame isolation and greed. Quote, "I am so angry and sad," said his granddaughter Elizabeth Balkan. Continue the quote, "It has become the exact opposite of what my grandfather set out to achieve." She described the death of Irene Maindell, her lifelong friend, as horrific, saying, quote, "The story needs to be told and judged by human standards and laws today." In June 2010, the New South Wales Police launched an investigation into the death after complaints from Ms Maindell's US-based son, James, and his wife, Nicole. The detective in charge found she was full of life in the days before her death, and at one stage she expressed puzzlement over why she was confined to bed. So full of morphine she didn't know she'd had a stroke. At an inquest in October 2011, the coroner, Michael Holmes, listed an intracranial hemorrhage with hypertension as the cause of death. He refused to address information submitted as part of the brief of evidence that questioned whether Ms Maindell's death had been turned into a, quote, church event. Mr Holmes declined to make any recommendations due to the HCCC inquiry running parallel to the hearing. That investigation has since found Dr Maindell breached New South Wales Medical Board guidelines when he treated an immediate member of his family and signed her death certificate. At the hearing, he will be asked why he did not take his mother to a specialist neurologist or arrange for a potentially life-saving MRI scan. In the week since Fairfax broke the story, feedback has poured in from Ms Maindell's former friends, ex-members of the Bruderhof, and from another son, who argues her last days were, quote, the culmination of a full and rich life that ended in the way she would have chosen. Len Maindell is one of her 10 children and said he supported the decisions made, adding, quote, I am personally grateful to know my mother could live out her last days with my father at her side and surrounded by people she loved. Ms Balkan described the early Bruderhof days as joyful and happy, but between 1950 and 1960, she said a US commune became the power centre of the movement. The fundamentalist attitude to matters of faith in the American churches, where new members were recruited, as well as their financial fortunes, turned the Bruderhof into a sect, a cult. Over the years, this only got stronger, she said. Members take lifetime vows of obedience and poverty, and the US-based group controls the finances and operations of more than 20 Bruderhof communes worldwide. However, a Danthonia senior pastor, Randall Gorga, maintained the Bruderhof had no policies that override decisions made by patients and families on end-of-life care, and claimed it was false and misleading to call the Bruderhof a cult. So, even hippies don't fail to report deaths. And they don't wind up with hippie doctors trying to treat their own family members. So yeah, at the moment the alternative lifestyle community comes out as being more law-abiding and more observant of community standards and mores than the Bruderhofen, the American semi-Amish, hyper-Christian community. Won't quite go as far as calling it a cult, but it's looking pretty cultish looking pretty cultish. But one's got to say, if somebody's knocked down by a stroke and they believe their time's come and their family believes their time's come, do they necessarily have to go to hospital and have an MRI and have a whole bunch of doctors decide that they're going to save their life and let them learn to live in a paralysed state or unable to speak or whatever? Like, I mean, I don't know that these people can be in trouble for her maybe choosing not to be treated if she was capable of making that choice, if she left some kind of documentary indication of what her treatment options would be. But to keep a stroke patient for 7 days at a farm 50 kilometres from a hospital, fill her up with morphine until she dies, and then fail to report the death and just bury her because it's okay, you know, it's all on the community. That's a kind of intensely arrogant way of looking at the country that they're living in the middle of. And it's also an indication of how the Australian legal system deals with the idea of people making unorthodox decisions about how they're going to die. It must be run through the local hospital and medical system, or you will find yourself in hot water. Is that interesting, Laura Leela? Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.